There are moments in life when someone's silence cuts deeper than the loudest argument. It was the kind of silence that builds between two people not because of words spoken, but because of the words that never came. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely alone in my own problems. I had just lost my job. The cafe where I'd worked for almost 3 years had closed down unexpectedly. No warning, no soft landing. One day I was pouring coffee. The next I was standing in my small kitchen, staring at the bills piling up on the table, trying to breathe through the panic sitting heavy on my chest. Rent was due at the end of the week, and my savings were a joke, enough to maybe cover groceries, and gas if I was lucky. We weren't married, my boyfriend and I. We didn't even live together. That was his idea, not mine. He liked his space, said it was healthy to have boundaries. But after a few years of hearing that word, it started to feel like just another wall between us. And yet, despite the distance, despite how often I had to remind myself that we weren't building a life together, but simply orbiting each other's, I still called him first. I didn't even get 2 sentences in before he cut me off. "Well, you'll figure it out," he said, like I was asking for the weather forecast instead of telling him I couldn't pay my rent. "You always do." I swallowed so hard it hurt. "I just thought maybe you could help me this month." "I wouldn't." "Look," he sighed, and I could hear the tapping of his fingers against something, distracted. "It's not really my responsibility, is it?" "I mean, you're independent. You always say so." I wanted to scream, not because he was wrong, but because he was using my own words against me. I was independent. I had always prided myself on that. But there's a difference between being independent and being left to drown alone. The call ended with one of those awkward pauses where neither of us really knew how to close the conversation. He mumbled something, like take care before hanging up. I stood there for a long time after, phone still pressed to my ear even though the line had gone dead. The apartment felt colder that night, empty in a way that had nothing to do with the furniture. I sat on the floor by the window, knees pulled tight to my chest, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. The city outside kept moving, as if my small collapse didn't matter at all. It was late when I heard the knock at the door, not frantic, not impatient, just steady. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater and pulled myself off the floor. When I opened the door, there he was. My landlord. He was always polite, courteous in that way older men sometimes are, as though they know their presence takes up more space than it should. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark skin that caught the light in eyes that seemed to notice, more than they let on. His voice was always calm, measured. He never raised it. "Sorry to bother you this late," he said, nodding once, just following up on the rent situation. The words made my stomach drop. I must have looked like hell. Red eyes. Messy hair, still in the oversized sweater I'd thrown on that morning because I couldn't bring myself to care. "I know the deadline's coming," I managed to say, my throat tight. "Am I lost my job?" There was a pause. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind where the other person is actually listening. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He just nodded again, slower this time. "That's rough," he said. "I'm sorry to hear it." I could feel the heat rise up my neck, humiliation burning through me. I hated how small I felt, how obvious my situation must have looked. "I'll figure it out," I blurted. I need a little time." His gaze didn't shift. He didn't cross his arms or lean on the doorframe like some men do when they're about to lay down the law. He just stood there, grounded, steady. "I'm not here to pressure you," he said softly. "But if you need to talk about options, my office is open. Come by tomorrow if you'd like." Options. The word echoed in my head long after he left. I didn't know what exactly he meant. I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out. But when the door closed behind him and I slid back down onto the floor, burying my face into my hands, one thought pressed itself into my mind and refused to leave. I couldn't count on the person I loved. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as independent as I'd always told myself. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence like a steady, unforgiving metronome. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again. Not my landlord's, but my boyfriend's. Those few simple words so casually thrown at me, clanging like loose change in an empty jar. You'll figure it out, as if that was enough. As if that was what support sounded like. By morning, the ache in my chest had settled into something colder, sharper. I moved through the motions of the day because I had to, not because I wanted to. Took a shower without feeling the water, got dressed without caring much what I put on. Jeans and old t-shirt. Hair pulled back loosely, barely touched with a brush. I looked tired and the mirror didn't lie. The notice on my fridge about the rent deadline stared at me like a quiet threat. I hated that it made my hands tremble when I looked at it. Hated that the thought of calling my boyfriend again to ask for help felt so impossible, so humiliating. But most of all, I hated the sinking feeling that the conversation wouldn't go any differently than it had the night before. I didn't plan to go to my landlord's office. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself I'd figure it out on my own, just like everyone seemed to expect me to. But somewhere between pacing my apartment and checking my bank account for the third time, I found myself putting on lipstick. Not bright, barely noticeable. Just enough to make me feel like I was at least trying. I changed my shirt twice before leaving the apartment. Simple clothes, nothing that suggested I cared too much about how I looked. But the truth was, I did care. I cared more than I wanted to admit. His office was just a few blocks away, tucked behind a small row of shops. I'd walked past it dozens of times, never needing to go inside before. The door was open. Soft music, playing quietly from a radio on the desk. He was there, seated behind a cluttered workspace, reading through a stack of papers. When he looked up and saw me standing there, he didn't smile right away. He just nodded, motioned for me to come in. "You made it," he said, voice low and even. I nodded, my throat too tight for a proper reply. I sat down across from him, feeling like I was 12 years old again, waiting to be scolded by a teacher for not turning in my homework on time. "I'm sorry to just show up," I said finally, the words feeling heavier than they should have been. He leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the arms of his chair. Eyes on me, calm, patient. "I told you you're welcome anytime." I looked down at my hands, fingers knotting together in my lap. I didn't want to cry. I'd already done enough of that the night before. I lost my job. I repeated, though he already knew. I really don't have the rent this month, not even part of it. The words tasted like failure, like defeat. I hated how they sounded, but they were the truth. He nodded slowly, still watching me with that same quiet focus, no judgment in his expression. Just listening. "I appreciate you being honest with me," he said after a moment. "Most people don't even do that." There was another pause between us, the kind that stretched long enough to feel heavy but not uncomfortable, more like he was giving me space to say more if I wanted to. "I've been looking for work," I added quickly, my voice a little too defensive. "I'm not just sitting around waiting for help." "I didn't assume you were," he answered gently. I could feel the heat creeping up the back of my neck again, a familiar wave of shame that I couldn't quite keep down. I hated being here like this, hated needing help at all. "I don't expect you to. Give me a free pass," I said, struggling to keep my tone steady. "I know that's not how this works." He didn't argue. He didn't make me feel worse than I already did. Instead, he leaned forward just slightly, folding his hands together on the desk between us. "What if we found a different way to handle it?" he asked, voice soft. I blinked, unsure what he meant. The words hung there, not suggestive, not loaded, just open. But there was something in the way he said them, something deliberate, controlled. "I'm listening," I replied, though I could already feel the tension start to build inside my chest. He didn't say anything at first. He just held my gaze, calm, steady, but with that hint of curiosity, the kind that waits, that lets you fill the space yourself. "There's no pressure," he said finally. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give, but you and I both know the situation you're in. If you'd be willing, maybe we could work out a private arrangement between us." The room felt smaller all of a sudden, the air thicker. His words weren't vulgar. They weren't even explicit. But I understood him perfectly. I didn't speak right away. I couldn't. My mind was racing too fast, trying to make sense of the ground shifting under my feet. "You mean I started, but my voice caught before I could finish." He nodded once, slowly. "Only if it's something you'd consider," he said. "F not. The door's still. Open." "You have my word." I sat there frozen for what felt like forever, heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I should have gotten up. I should have walked out. But I didn't. I stayed. And when I finally did stand, my legs felt unsteady beneath me. I moved toward the door, but before I reached it, I stopped my hand on the frame. I turned to look at him one last time, unsure of what I was searching for in his expression. But all I saw was that same calm, steady patience, the space he was giving me to make my own decision. I left without saying anything else, but my body was still humming from the charge of that conversation, and deep down, I knew I would be back. Sicha. Air outside felt colder than it should have for that time of year. Or maybe it was just me, walking home with my thoughts too loud to notice anything else. The streets blurred around me, cars passing by, people living their lives. None of it seemed real. I wasn't even sure how I made it back to my apartment. I unlocked the door mechanically, dropped my keys onto the counter, and stood there in the middle of the room like I didn't recognize the place. It's a strange thing, the way a single conversation can rearrange the entire shape of your mind. I kept going over it, again and again, hearing his voice, feeling the weight of his words settle into my chest. Maybe we could work out a private arrangement, nothing forceful, nothing ugly, just quiet, deliberate possibility. I told myself that I should be angry. I told myself I should feel disgusted, humiliated, offended, but the truth that I couldn't run from, no matter how hard I tried, was that I didn't feel any of those things. I felt seen. And I hated myself for that. The worst part wasn't the offer itself. The worst part was how easily I could picture saying yes. I spent the next 2 days avoiding my phone like it might bite me. I didn't call my boyfriend. He didn't call me either. There was no sudden concern from him, no check-in, no follow-up to the conversation we'd had that night. He'd already moved on. I was sure of it. Back to his schedule, his meetings, his world where I was just an accessory he could put down when things got too heavy. And yet, there was a small part of me, the stupid, hopeful part, that waited for him to call anyway. Some pathetic flicker of belief that he might surprise me, might do the thing I had been too afraid to ask for, to care enough to show up. But the silence from him was louder than any words. By the third day, the rent deadline was staring me down, like an executioner. The number circled in red on my calendar felt childish now, as if highlighting it would somehow make it less real. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at it, knowing exactly how little was sitting in my bank account. I wasn't the kind of person who asked for help easily. I built my whole life around the idea that I didn't need to. And yet, here I was, painted into a corner, my pride clinging to me like wet clothes I couldn't peel off. I almost didn't send the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a long time. I typed out 6 drafts, deleting each one, before my nerves could get the better of me. When I finally hit send, The text was so short it felt like a betrayal of how much turmoil was behind it. "Can we talk again?" He responded quickly, just 2 words, simple and unassuming. "Come by." I read those words over and over, each time feeling a different wave of panic and relief wash through me. The sun was starting to set when I finally left my apartment. The walk to his office felt longer than it had the first time. Every step felt like I was walking towards something I couldn't quite name, but already knew I wouldn't be able to turn away from. When I pushed the door open, the room was quiet. The same soft music hummed from the radio. He was at his desk again, leaning back in his chair like he'd been waiting all along. He didn't stand when I entered, didn't greet me with any false enthusiasm, just nodded toward the chair across from him, the same way he had before. I sat down slowly, unsure how to even begin. "I'm not here to make this uncomfortable," he said, breaking the silence after a long pause. "If you changed your mind, I understand." I swallowed hard. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, fingers twisting together until the knuckles ached. I could barely look at him. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk, hands folded. His expression stayed calm, open, giving me room to say whatever I needed to. "I'm not going to ask you for details you're not ready to share," he said softly. "But I'll tell you this. I respect the fact that you came here. Whatever you decide, I'll respect that too." His words landed differently than I expected. There was no rush, no pressure behind them, just patience. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I need time," I said finally. "You have it," he replied. It should have felt like the end of the conversation, but I didn't move. Neither did he. The space between us held something thick and unspoken, a quiet understanding neither of us tried to name out loud. "I didn't think it would ever come to this," I murmured, not even sure if I was talking to him or myself. "Most people don't," he said. I hated how steady his voice was, how measured, like he'd seen this before, like he understood it better than I ever could. There was a long pause, heavy, but not uncomfortable. I could feel his eyes on me, but not in a way that made my skin crawl. It was worse than that. It made me feel like he actually saw me. Not just the broke tenant sitting across from him, but the whole exhausted, frayed, quietly desperate person I'd been trying so hard to keep together. I stood up slowly, my hands still shaking more than I wanted them to. "I'll let you know," I said. He nodded once, saying nothing more, letting me have the last word without contest. But as I turned to leave, I felt his eyes following me to the door, and for the first time, I didn't hate the way it felt. I hated that I didn't hate it at all. I thought that walking away from that conversation would bring me some sense of clarity, some relief for having held my ground, for not giving in so easily to what was offered between the lines. But clarity didn't come. What came instead was a weight in my chest that only grew heavier with each hour that passed. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head, couldn't stop dissecting every word, every look, every pause between the two of us. The truth was that I had already crossed a line the moment I didn't shut the door on the idea. I spent the next few days trying to bury myself in whatever distractions I could find. I filled out job applications like it was my full-time occupation now, scrolling endlessly through listings that all started to blur together. Waitressing, reception work, retail, anything that could buy me a little time. But the responses when they came at all were polite rejections, generic apologies wrapped in corporate language, positions filled, not what we're looking for at this time. Best of luck in your search. Every no chipped away at my resolve a little more. The apartment felt smaller each day. The walls seemed to lean in closer, as if they were tired of hearing me pace the floor, tired of watching me spiral in circles that led nowhere. The unopened bills stacked on the counter became harder to ignore. The red ink on the rent notice glared at me from across the room like an accusation, and still silence from my boyfriend. No calls, no check-ins, not even a casual text to ask how I was holding up. The first few days I told myself he was giving me space, that maybe he thought I needed time to figure things out on my own. But as the week dragged on, it became harder to believe that. The space between us wasn't temporary, it was structural, built in, a feature, not a flaw. I started to notice things I hadn't wanted to admit before. How often our conversations were about his life, his work, his stresses. How rarely he asked about mine. How easily he dismissed my worries with quick platitudes, as if kindness were something he rationed carefully, reserved only for crises that fit neatly into his comfort zone. Financial problems apparently didn't qualify. The more I sat with that realization, the angrier I became. Not at him, or not only at him, but at myself. For holding on so tightly to the idea of what we were supposed to be. For waiting, always waiting, for him to meet me halfway. It was on the fourth night, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a bowl of cereal I didn't have the appetite to finish, that my phone lit up. Not from him. Not the message I had been pretending I wasn't hoping for. It was from my landlord. "Hope you're doing okay. Just checking in." 7 simple words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suggestive. But they cracked something open in me that I'd been holding closed with both hands. The kindness of it. The simple act of someone asking how I was without following it up with judgment or advice. It knocked the air right out of me. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the message for a long time, rereading it until the words blurred together. My fingers hovered over the keyboard more than once, typing and deleting a dozen different replies. When I finally answered, it wasn't with anything clever or defensive, just the truth. "I'm not doing great." His reply came quickly. "If you want to talk, I'm here." There was no flirtation in it. No pressure, just an open door. Waiting. I don't know what I was expecting when I put on my shoes and grabbed my jacket. I told myself I was just going to clear my head. A walk? Nothing more. But my feet knew where they were going before my brain caught up. I didn't even hesitate when I reached his office. The lights were still on. The soft glow spilling out onto the sidewalk made the place feel warmer than it had any right to. I stood outside for longer than I should have, hands stuffed deep into my pockets, willing myself to turn around and go back home. But my body stayed rooted in place. And after a while, as if he'd sensed me through the walls, the door opened. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Come in," he said quietly. I stepped inside, my heart beat loud enough in my ears that I was sure he could hear it. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. The same music played softly from the radio, filling the space between us with the kind of ease I wasn't sure I deserved to feel. I stayed standing, not trusting myself to sit down. I didn't come here for I started, but the words felt too heavy to finish. He nodded once. Slowly. "I know." There was a moment, brief but undeniable, when our eyes met in something past between us. Recognition, understanding. Whatever it was, it made my throat tighten so hard I could barely swallow. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I'm just tired," I admitted. "Then sit," he said, motioning toward the chair across from him. I did, slowly, carefully, like the act of sitting down might somehow make everything more real. We didn't speak for a while after that. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was something closer to permission. Space to breathe. I meant what I said before. He offered eventually. "I'm not going to pressure you. Whatever happens here, it's your choice." I nodded, my eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't trust myself to look at him, but in the quiet that followed, I felt the weight of his attention on me. Not invasive, not demanding, just there. And in that moment, I realized how long it had been since anyone had looked at me. Like that. There's a certain kind of quiet that doesn't ask for words. The kind that settles between two people when everything that needs to be said already hangs in the air. Waiting. That was the quiet that filled the room as I sat there across from him, my hands gripping the edge of the chair like it might keep me from floating away. I told myself I was only here because I needed to talk. Because I needed someone to hear me. Really hear me without the loaded weight of expectation. But that wasn't the whole truth. I had crossed a different line the moment I opened that door. The moment I walked into his office with more than just words sitting heavy on my tongue. He watched me the way someone watches a fire they're not sure they should put out. Calm, steady, aware of the danger but unwilling to turn away. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to say I wasn't that kind of woman. That I wasn't capable of doing the thing we were both circling so slowly. But the truth sat too loud in my chest to ignore. I was tired of holding myself together. Tired of pretending that strength meant isolation. Tired of waiting for someone else to decide if I was worth showing up for. When I finally raised my eyes to meet his, I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I let the silence speak for me. He stood, moving with the same quiet confidence I had come to recognize in him, and crossed the small space between us. There was no urgency in his steps, no rush to close the distance. He paused when he reached me, standing just close enough that I could feel the heat of his body without him having to touch me. Still he waited, always waiting, giving me the space to choose. I didn't say yes. I didn't have to. I reached up first, my fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of his sleeve. Feeling the solidity of him beneath it, that small, deliberate act was all it took to break the last piece of resistance inside me. I stood, slow, careful, my body moving before my mind could talk me out of it. There was a moment, a single heartbeat of hesitation, where I could have stepped back. I could have told myself that this was just a bad idea born out of desperation. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the space between us, leaning in, pressing my lips to his. It wasn't soft, it wasn't tentative. It was hungry in the way that only loneliness can be. His hands rose, one resting against the small of my back, the other gently cupping the side of my face, steadying me as if I might fall. But I wasn't falling. I was choosing. Choosing to be wanted, to be touched, to be something more than the independent woman barely holding herself together. The kiss deepened, but there was no rush, no frantic clawing or grabbing, only deliberate movements, slow and measured, like he knew exactly how dangerous this was and wasn't afraid to take his time with the fire. When we finally parted, it wasn't with shame. It wasn't with regret. I didn't look away from him. I held his gaze, breathless, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. His eyes searched mine, waiting again. Always waiting. But this time I spoke. I don't know what this makes me